factory. The representative for Verizon said they were aware of the speech and debate clause. Good for them. But they had no system in place to flag subpoena requests for sitting members of Congress. But they say they've learned a lesson. As he put it, our processes, and I'm quoting him, our processes could have been better suited to meet what was a new and unique set of circumstances. Well, you know what, Mr. President? We're turning 250 years old. I don't think the Constitution is exactly new. I don't think the speech and debate clause is exactly new. I think that their response was truly an understatement. Verizon utterly failed in its responsibilities. So did T-Mobile. In fact, the company was under a specific contract that required it to notify the Senate Sergeant at Arms about subpoenas related to senators. I think Verizon forgot that. Yet, not a single person at Verizon or any of the carriers lost their jobs because of this. I went down the road, Mr. President. Has anyone been fired? The answer was no and no and no. Not a single person. There has to be accountability. If they can trample on the constitutional rights of sitting members of Congress and the President of the United States, they can do it to every U.S. citizen. We cannot let this stand. Arctic frost marked the worst weaponization of government in American history, worse than Watergate, and I am determined to make certain that Jack Smith is held accountable and that no American citizen, no one ever, is going to face the weaponization of the U.S. government against them. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I rise today in support of the Save America Act. I've heard a lot of hysteria, hyperbole, and sadly, falsehoods about this bill, which have created a good deal of confusion. And frankly, a lot of the issues have become muddled. I think we've lost sight of what we're really debating in this chamber. So today, I'd like to dispel a few myths about the Save America Act and address the legitimate questions raised or voiced by some of my colleagues. But first, I want to make sure we all understand how important this issue really is. Mr. President, I consider myself uniquely qualified when I say that every vote matters. In 2022, I lost my first statewide election in Pennsylvania by 950 votes. That's 14 votes per county. I won my second election in 2024 by 15,000 votes of over 7 million cast. These incredibly narrow races, each of which had electoral issues of their own, show just how important it is that our elections run smoothly, fairly, and only legitimate votes are counted. And right now, we must not pretend that all elections in America meet this important standard. Just last year, in my home state of Pennsylvania, Chester County officials mistakenly omitted 70,000 third-party votes from the voter rolls. Registered voters were turned away at the polls, and an unknown number of unverified voters were cast regular ballots. Every single time Americans hear about election problems like Chester County, they rightly question the integrity of our electoral process. It should come as no surprise to us that according to a recent Scripps and Ipsos poll, more than half of Americans, more than half, are concerned about non-citizens voting, and more than half fear electoral fraud. The bottom line is we cannot stand in this chamber and claim there is not a problem. There is a problem, and the people who put us here agree. Colleagues, we have a duty to root out the source of this distrust and restore the integrity of our democratic process. As we celebrate America's 250th anniversary, we must not put to chance what John Adams called, and I quote, the primary right by which all other rights are protected, end quote. And that is why I support Senator Lee's Save America Act. This bill will not fix every issue with our elections, but it does three critical things. First, it prevents non-citizens from voting by requiring people to show proof of citizenship when registering to vote, and to show a government-issued photo ID when casting a ballot. Second, it directs the states to remove non-citizens from their voter rolls by mandating regular reviews of those lists and giving states the abilities and the tools to accomplish this critical task. And finally, it improves accountability by strengthening the enforcement of the current law and imposing penalties on election officials who violate the law by registering non-citizens to vote. Now, the requirements for voter ID and proof of citizenship in particular have been twisted and misrepresented. Let me set the record straight. Federal law mandates that only U.S. citizens may vote. However, under the Supreme Court's interpretation, voters are not required to show proof of citizenship. The risk is clear. According to the Department of Homeland Security, over 10 million illegal immigrants entered our country during the last administration, and a total of at least 22 million non-citizens reside in the United States. In 19 states, non-citizens can obtain a driver's license and in some cases, that driver's license automatically registers them to vote. This is an unacceptable vulnerability in our election integrity. And for that reason, it's now incumbent on Congress to close the loophole. We must secure the fundamental principle that voting is a right reserved only for American citizens. The Save America Act also requires voters to show a government ID when casting a ballot. Now, I've heard some claim this is too high a barrier. Let's be serious. We ask Americans to show an ID to buy a beer, to board a plane, to donate blood, to apply for benefits, to even get married. But when it comes to electing leaders who decide the direction of our country, write our laws, and command our armed forces, no ID is required. That is absolutely absurd. Now, many on the left look at our electoral system and they say there's nothing to see here. No issue, no problem. But that's what they said about wide open borders. That's what they said about censoring conservatives online. That's what they said about the botched Afghanistan withdrawal. And that's what they said about President Biden's cognitive decline. They were wrong on all of those things, and they are wrong on this too. And they are out of step with the country. Americans of all political persuasions have supported tighter election laws for decades. In 2005, former President Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, joined former Secretary of State Jim Baker, a Republican, to form a commission on election integrity. They identified voter ID laws as the single most important reform that was needed 20 years ago. A vast majority of the American people agree. As we see here on a poll from the Pew Research Center, 95% of Republicans and 71% of Democrats polled all support voter ID. My friends, if an 80-20 issue such as this cannot get 60 votes, in this 100-person chamber, something is amiss. Now, some of my colleagues have raised concerns regarding voter suppression. They warn that many U.S. citizens do not have a hard copy proving their citizenship. The Save America Act directly addresses this concern. It puts in place alternate documentation options, state verification processes, and other protections that will ensure citizens are not disenfranchised. I also hear some of my colleagues voice fears of federal overreach. As a conservative, I believe that the less government interference in people's lives, the better. But the Save America Act does not federalize our elections. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution makes clear that while states determine the time, place, and manner of federal elections, the Congress, and I quote, may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, end of quote. That is, we in the Congress, in this body, have the constitutional authority to set certain rules of the road nationwide. The Save America Act merely creates a mechanism to verify that state elections comply with existing law. Now, there's other electoral reforms that are also necessary and critical, including Senator Hagerty's proposed Equal Representation Act, which I'm proud to co-sponsor. It ensures that the census does not count non-citizens when determining congressional seats and electoral college votes. Frankly, I worry. I worry that some on the left oppose the Save America Act simply because they want to cheat by allowing non-citizens to vote. But at the same time, and as always, for my Democratic colleagues in this body, in the Senate, who oppose this bill, I trust that they are acting in good faith. But I do ask them and all who oppose the Save America Act, regardless of party, to consider the extraordinary stakes. We have the opportunity in this Congress to remove deep vulnerabilities in our elections and restore America's trust in this core function of our republic. I can think of few things more important than that. And for that reason, I implore my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in supporting the Save America Act. And if not, I respectfully challenge you to explain to the clear majority of your constituents why you believe our elections are not in desperate need of repair. I yield the floor.
North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually want to thank my colleague from Pennsylvania for bringing up what I think is a very important subject. I'm proud, as you are, coming from a state that had voter ID, and Senator McCormick, you wouldn't necessarily know this, but we passed the first voter ID when I was Speaker. And I heard all these arguments, and they fall on deaf ears. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at Help America Vote Act and other things, we can make it easy to vote, but we have to make it hard to cheat. And most people in America don't realize that we estimate about 20 to 25 million people illegally present in this country. And you should keep in mind, in each of the five last presidential elections, the margin of victory at the height was 9 million and at the low point was 2 million. So when we say that illegally present people who are able to vote can actually change the outcome of elections, it's not theoretical, it's proven by the math. So I appreciate your comments. Mr. President, I'm here to talk about a different subject. Sort of relates to the commentary that Senator Blackburn spoke about, but only a little bit different twist. You see, I think that vindictive prosecution is wrong, period. Whether the administration is a Democrat or a Republican, vindictive prosecution is wrong, period. And what we're on the brink of with respect to the chair of the Federal Reserve is calling the pot calling the kettle black. We can't come here and talk about appropriately the Arctic frost investigation. We can't talk about the various prosecutions under the Obama era and the Biden era as being bad if we actually condone what I believe in many cases are the same sorts of behavior today. I'm a Republican. I voted for President Trump. And I support the vast majority of what President Trump is doing. But I think we have a trend here that makes us no better than the people that some of my colleagues are coming down to the floor and criticizing. At some point, one of the two parties have to stand on principle and end this cycle, or it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. And let me give you an example of where I think it's getting bad. A Sunday night, about a month or so ago, I saw a report that the chair of the Fed board, Jerome Powell, was being investigated by the DOJ. And we all know the president's frustration with Chair Powell. I've got some frustration with him, too. I'm an armchair quarterback. There are certain things I didn't like him doing, but I've never thought of him as a criminal. But I find out on a Sunday night that we have somebody in the bowels of the D.C. district of the U.S. attorney, an assistant U.S. attorney, who has decided to pursue an investigation and seek an indictment or prosecution against 2 minutes of testimony in the banking hearing that I attended. And I not only attended that banking hearing, but several of my colleagues did as too, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, I seek unanimous consent to insert into the register the comments from 7 of my colleagues on the banking committee who said they do not believe that President, or if I may seek unanimous consent.
Without objection.
What this document does, and the reason I thought it was important to put it in the federal record, is we've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, including me, who have said that we don't think a crime was committed. We're on the banking committee. We're the majority of the Republicans on the banking committee. I'm an old man, so I like watching forensic files. I don't know if young people watch it, but I've been watching it for like 20 or 30 years. And I can imagine this being the opening of a forensic file. Okay, normally it's about a perpetrator, something bad happened, the prosecutor's going after it because they have the eyewitnesses. Well, this forensic file opens like this. All of the witnesses at the scene of the crime said no crime was committed. Right down the line. In fact, they've even submitted printed evidence. Yet the prosecutor thinks otherwise. I don't think that'd be a very interesting forensic files because what it says is no crime got committed. Now, can we talk about whether or not there was an overrun in the building? There may have been. But I don't know if everybody's paying attention, but that happens a lot in government. And if we're going to actually accuse someone of criminal behavior because of a project overrun in federal government, we better start budgeting a lot more for prisons. Because that's the norm here. I hate it because I came from a world where you lost your job if you went over budget and over time. But that's just a part of the way this place works. But Mr. President, 2 minutes of testimony, 7 members in the banking committee present on that day saying that they do not believe there was criminal intent sends a very clear message to a young U.S. attorney with a dream in the D.C. district that why don't you come talk to the people who were at the alleged scene of the crime? We said we do not believe there was any criminal intent, Mr. President. 2 minutes. As a matter of fact, the other thing, if I could seek unanimous consent, I have another 2 pages, which are some of the allegations that were being quoted from a press report that are patently wrong.
Without objection.
Thank you. This is a case where we had members on the committee responding to news reports that were proven wrong. And folks, I thought this was probably going to end this way. And it's one of the reasons why I decided to invite myself to a tour when the president went to this building to take a look at it. I was there with the president. He was very kind, shook my hand, and welcomed me to participate in this tour. I saw nothing there. I saw a few things, frustration. You know, you got Historic Commission, everybody else controlling the state of the project, but I certainly didn't see any criminal activity. I certainly didn't see any of these alleged rooftop garden tariffs, water features, VIP elevator, special marble. They had to take it down and put it back up. Building in D.C. is complicated. So almost all the allegations were disproven. And yet, we still have a prosecutor that's trying to pursue a criminal prosecution for the chair of the Federal Reserve. Well, the night that it was announced, I made the statement that I'll take this allegation seriously. But I'm concerned it comes from someone without consultation with big DOJ. I don't think Pam Bondi, any of the senior people in DOJ knew anything about it. Without consultation with the White House, they decided to pursue this criminal investigation. So they put me in an untenable position. If I'm quiet on that Sunday night and don't say something, Monday morning we may wake up to a very different market. If all of a sudden the Federal Reserve, that since its creation has been considered independent and separate from many presidents who have been angry with them, Democrats and Republicans alike, I felt like if I didn't put my foot down and say no one is going to fill that seat until this investigation is done, that we could have literally had headlines across all financial markets that the United States no longer has an independent Federal Reserve. And unless you track it as closely as I have in my current role as senator and in my past role as a partner of Price Waterhouse, tracking financial or banking institutions, you may not be able to appreciate that. But folks, this is real. The Federal Reserve is the gold standard for central banks. And its independence is critically important. It's critically important for us continuing to have the gold standard for the economy, the gold standard for the rule of law. We cannot allow some junior U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney in some jurisdiction here all of a sudden play with fire. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't look through the second and third order effects, and quite honestly, they exposed the president in the process. So, Mr. President, I find myself in a position where I want to reaffirm what I said very directly on that Sunday night before the markets open on Monday morning. I will not allow any board member for the Federal Reserve to go through the banking committee for chair or for replacement of expired terms until this matter is settled. I have no problem with us having an investigation like we should with so many other areas of government. I'd like to have oversight for the East Wing construction to make sure that that stays on target and doesn't go over budget. I'd like to have oversight into the upfit of the Qatari 747. It's a new Air Force One, kind of Air Force Light, because you can't take it out of the United States. All of those are taxpayer dollars being spent, and we should have visibility into that. So count me in for doing an investigation for the comments on that day. The 2 minutes of testimony, that is the only reason I'm at the floor today and refusing to allow a Fed board member to be confirmed, because I feel that strongly. As a matter of fact, it may take us to a new low in terms of a vindictive prosecution. And if you think Arctic Frost was bad, if you think some of the other investigations on the Obama era was bad, ladies and gentlemen, we're setting a new low that could make that look like child's play. And for that reason, until the investigation is resolved, I cannot and I will not vote to support anyone on the Federal Reserve in my remaining tenure in the U.S. Senate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, last month I came to the floor after the tragic killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy and talked about what had happened in my state. Renee Good left behind 3 kids, including a 6-year-old. And when she was shot and killed by an ICE agent, her final words to the officer who shot her, "I'm not mad at you." Alex Preddy was a VA intensive care nurse, a guardian angel, who did one of the most selfless jobs one could think of, caring for our veterans, often in their final hours. Last Saturday, I met with the workers that were on the shift that only 2 weeks before was that same shift of workers that were on when they found out that their coworker, Alex, had been killed. His last words were to a woman who had been pushed down by border control, and his last words were, "Are you okay?" His fellow workers at the VA recounted to me what a kind-hearted person he was, how every patient felt like they were their only patient. Other family members of patients have remarked about that too. The coworkers told me how he was the kind of guy that would fill in on the shifts when someone had a family emergency or just needed a time off, and he would fill in for them on their shift, including that Saturday morning shift. Both Renee and Alex should be alive today. And as we honor their memories, I'm on the floor again today, following the administration's announcement of its plan to finally end Operation Metro Surge and draw down the thousands of federal ICE agents that aren't just in Minneapolis or St. Paul, that actually I think people don't quite understand. They're all over our state. They're in the suburbs. They're in small towns. The number of calls that we get, my office is handling hundreds and hundreds of cases right now, but the cases of just someone who is in a store and gets stopped because they're someone of color, or the videos of two white friends with one Latino friend, and it's Latino they would go up to and say, "Are you legal?" And the Latino says, "Yes, I am," and they still throw him in the car, maybe because they could get a bounty. The number of people that were stopped multiple times, the Somali police officers who were off duty that were taken out of their car. The stories go on and on. You can't have 3,000 ICE agents in a metro area, and again, they also went rural in a big, big way, but in a metro area where they outnumber the number of sworn police officers in our 10 biggest police departments, which includes Minneapolis and St. Paul. They were triple the number of sworn police officers in Minneapolis and St. Paul. But for more than 2 months, Minnesotans stood together. They stared down ICE, and they never blinked. They marched, and I was there, 50,000 strong in 10 below zero weather, peacefully. And what I'll never forget is 50,000 people marching peacefully, filling up the entire streets of Minneapolis peacefully. And then less than 12 hours, 24 hours later, 6 border control guys shoot a guy with a cell phone in his hand in the back. They couldn't handle that. So ICE withdrawing from Minnesota, it's good. We're glad they're leaving our state, let me be clear. And when I talked to Director Homan about 10 days ago, he said this was the timetable, and they must follow through. He said they would first push out the border control agents and send them home, and they did that in the number of couple hundreds, and now they are bringing home the remaining Metro Surge ICE agents to get to the original footprint. But ICE withdrawing from Minnesota is just the beginning. We need accountability for the lives lost and the extraordinary abuse of power in the hands of these agents. And we, of course, must see a complete overhaul of the agency. And I do not know how anyone can justify $75 billion extra dollars for this agency, making them bigger than the FBI, when that money could still, the remaining money, go to local law enforcement. It could go to help people pay for their health care premiums. For months, ICE has made my state less safe. It's not just a horrific shooting. We have also seen repeated violations of the constitutional rights of the people of Minnesota. I do say to our colleagues, if you believe in the First Amendment and the right to assemble, then show it. If you believe in the Second Amendment and that Alex Preddy had a right to be a lawful gun owner, and it was the border control agents that took his gun out of his holster, all he was holding was a cell phone, then show it. If you believe in the Fourth Amendment and the right against search and seizure, and that you can't have armed agents ramming through an elder Hmong man's door and pulling him out in his underwear and throwing him in a car, only to find out after they drove him around for an hour that they had the wrong guy, and that, in fact, the guy they were going after had been in prison for years, and that this Hmong man had done nothing wrong and was the son of a beloved nurse that treated American soldiers in Vietnam. Those are the stories that people are never going to forget in my state. A fourth grader from Columbia Heights and her mom detained by ICE on the way to school. The little 5-year-old, little Liam, standing there scared in his blue hat with floppy ears and his Spider-Man backpack. Those two kids, the fourth grader and Liam, sent to Texas. Then the judge, they sent them to Texas without even waiting to see what the court says. And then the court says, no, can't do that. And then they have to bring him back from Texas in his little blue hat with the little floppy ears. This administration also sent a 2-year-old to Texas. My staff and many other local lawmakers worked through the night on that case. Came back from Texas. It should never have come to this. A court case was pending, and they put a 2-year-old on the plane when her mom was waiting for her in Minnesota. These are just a few of the stories. As our local police have repeatedly made clear in the cities and in the suburbs and in the rural areas, ICE's actions have not made us safer. They have made us so much less safe. They have taken taxpayer money, at some estimates $18 million a week, and spent it on hotel rooms that should have been used for families visiting from Wisconsin and Iowa and Canada that like to go to the Mall of America in the middle of the winter.
Why would they be spending that money on
Those hotel rooms should have been used by people in greater Minnesota that want to come in and go ice fishing or enjoy skiing in our state. But instead, we had 3,000 ICE agents in Bloomington, Minnesota alone, our biggest suburb. 1,000 ICE agents in their hotel room. Think of how much money that is. And all the overtime for the police officers that could have been following up on child cases and could have been helping on burglary cases and could have been helping citizens with the trust that they built over the years. And that trust, so much on the line now, but kept intact because of all those local police officers throughout our state and local sheriff deputies have handled this travesty. This goes way beyond welcoming help for violent offenders, which we would, or a fraud investigation. Way beyond all of that. In fact, the opposite has happened because some highly experienced prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota, who have been there through Republican-appointed U.S. attorneys and Democratic-appointed U.S. attorneys,
answer all those questions. If they would have
and
cooperated,
have led the cases
it would have
on
never
fraud,
happened.
the important cases to go after the stealing of taxpayer money, and brought 80-some cases already and won major convictions in court. Those prosecutors, who are so well respected in our state, were asked to investigate Renee Good's wife after she was gunned down. And they said, no, we will not do that. And they stepped down. It reminded me of the decorated war veteran in New York, in their U.S. Attorney's Office, when asked to dismiss a case that had been rightfully brought against then Mayor Eric Adams. That prosecutor, who had clerked for conservative justices, a member of the Federalist Society, he said in a letter to the Justice Department, "You may find a fool or a coward to file your motion, but it will never be me." That's what those assistant U.S. attorneys, including the former acting head of the U.S. Attorney's Office that had been installed by the Trump administration on my recommendation, who did an incredible job through the horrific assassination of former Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband, and also was there at the sides of the families when those little children were gunned down through stained glass windows at Annunciation Church. Those are the people that they messed with and asked them to do something they felt were unethical. And as a result, all of the prosecutors that were heading up the righteous fraud investigations and prosecutions are no longer in that office. So you tell me how these actions have made our state more safe. It's the opposite. School attendance down, families living in fear, people staying home, restaurants and businesses feeling the impact. Operation Metro Surge costing our Minnesota economy an estimated $80 million per week, all for the shock and awe. We're such a small percentage of the people that they apprehended were involved in violent crime. At its peak, one study showed that the surge cost federal, state, and local governments at least $18 million every single week. The fact is, Operation Metro Surge put our state at the center of America's heartbreak, but it also put us at the center of America's courage and America's hope. Every day across our state, people did extraordinary things. Ordinary people did extraordinary things. They drove other kids to school. They brought food to their neighbors. They showed up for small businesses. Teachers and other school leaders stood up and protected their students, organized food drives and computer drives. Attorneys across our state at private law firms took ICE to court to enforce people's constitutional rights. And judges appointed by presidents of both parties, including our conservative chief judge of the Federal District Court of Minnesota, issued opinions and strongly worded opinions demanding that people come into court unless their orders were followed.
Let's do her. Sorry, I'm going to have everybody that you heard. I don't like it either.
Today, the administration's top border official, Tom Homan, announced the end of Operation Surge and the drawdown of the 3,000 ICE agents, again, triple the amount of sworn police officers in the combined cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, leaving only what he has called a small footprint. He has been straightforward with me since he arrived on the ground in Minnesota, straightforward with our chiefs, and we appreciate that. But we must be vigilant in making sure there is a real and thorough drawdown. We need transparent, objective investigations and justice for Renee Good and Alex Preddy and the many others who have had their rights violated by this administration. There must be new leadership at the Department of Homeland Security, and Kristi Noem must resign. That's what you do with $75 billion. You put bounties on legal citizens. You break out windows of people with disabilities who are born in this country and drag them to a detention center. That's what you do with $75 billion of taxpayer money. You take Hmong elders and throw them out of their house in their underwear and their Crocs on their feet in below zero weather and throw them into a car. You stop off-duty police officers just because they're not white. That's what you do with $75 billion. So that's why she must step down. And there must be major reforms to immigration enforcement, including a complete overhaul of this agency. Americans want federal agents to abide by the same code of conduct as local law enforcement and be held accountable when they don't. Americans want transparency. Federal agents shouldn't be masked. They should be required to use body cameras. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We must end roving patrols. Federal agents should not enter private property without a judicial warrant. We must end the bounty system that incentivizes arrests without cause and has taken down numerous people, multiple people, hundreds of people in our state that were legal, born in our state, have passports. They wouldn't even listen to them when they told them as they threw them into a car. We must protect sensitive locations, and the racial profiling must end. Today, a number of our colleagues, including myself, voted against continuing to fund ICE. Budgets show our values. That extra $75 billion, as I explained, tripled agency funding, giving it more money than the FBI. That was wrong. That money could have gone to local enforcement, Affordable Care Act, tax credits for 3 years. $75 billion would have paid for everyone in the country to get their tax credit extended to help them pay for their premiums under the Affordable Care Act. An occupying force was in our state. They tried to sow chaos and fear, but Minnesota didn't take the bait. As Bruce Springsteen sings in his new song, The Streets of Minneapolis, against smoke and rubber bullets, in the dawn's early light, citizens stood for justice, their voices ringing through the night. We've shown the world how to protect democracy and take care of our neighbors. And we are going to continue to stand up for accountability, for justice, for change. And when people ask me, what can we do? Well, you do that. You continue to stand up. When people outside our state, what can we do to help Minnesota? Well, now, with ICE agents leading, maybe you want to wait till the weather warms up just a little, you can come and visit our great state. You can fill up those hotel rooms that were taken over by ICE agents and go visit incredible places in our state where Prince got his start. You can go to First Avenue. You can go to the Mall of America. You can go up north or down south in Minnesota and see the incredible bike trails and beautiful places, and Lake Superior, the most superior lake of them all. So that's what we want you to do. We want you to come to our state and visit. We want you to invest in our state. We want you to start businesses in our state. We want you to send your kids to school in our state. We want people to come and work in our state because we have shown the country and the world what we are all about. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Guess there's nobody next.
Senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to set the stage for where we're at this moment. What just happened? Republicans voted to move forward on a bipartisan appropriations bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security, which includes, among other things, ICE funding, TSA funding, FEMA funding, and the Democrats voted no. Now, that's not all. Right about now, there's a bus leaving. There's a bus leaving the Capitol grounds and headed for an airport. Democrats are on that bus who just voted to defund the paycheck of the TSA agent making $40,000 a year to hop on a plane funded by your tax dollars to go to Munich, to go to Europe, and badmouth American foreign policy. They'll be sipping wine with the global elites, telling them, don't listen to President Trump. That's not who we are. I got news for you. The American people have weighed in, and they did in November of 2024, and this new direction of foreign policy is the ascending view. But outside of the foreign policy debate, just how offensive is it that they voted to defund DHS and are going to fly transatlantic on the taxpayer dime and trash talk America? That won't get reported probably many places. The corrupt media covers for the Democrats day in and day out around here. That's one of the things I've learned in my 3 years in the Senate. The hypocrisy is insane. That's where they're headed. In a broader sense, where are we at? And for my Republican colleagues, I hope you appreciate what this is, this moment, because this isn't some isolated incident. This is a 10-year struggle for common sense Americans who've pushed back against a radical open borders policy that's been pushed by the Democrats. President Trump won in 2016 on a few issues, but the electrical cord that began when he came down the escalator, that continues to this day, is taking on illegal immigration. And the forgotten men and women in this country whose jobs were initially displaced when the failed policies of the politicians of this town sent their jobs overseas, the towns that I grew up in, and then when they were looking for new jobs, their wages were suppressed and their jobs went to illegal immigrants. The Democrats have never understood that. They've never understood that Americans were upset about that. And then, for the 4 years previous to this, Joe Biden let in 15 million people. How many? 1 million is a lot of people. 5 million is a lot of people. 15 million people came into this country illegally. We don't know who most of them are. We don't even know where they're at. What we do know is that literally tens of thousands of them are murderers. Hundreds of thousands of them are violent criminals. The left has tried to destroy this country through this open borders policy because we're all citizens of the world. Borders are just arbitrary lines on a map. That's where the modern Democrat Party is at. They don't actually believe that America as a sovereign country should be able to tell people who can come and who has to leave. So that's what this whole thing is about. This isn't about Minnesota or some recent event. This is about the Democrats failing to accept the verdict from the American people that they sent President Trump back into the Oval Office to fix mass migration, to take on mass migration with mass deportations. And regardless of the antics that happen here today on their no vote and flying with the globalists in Europe, it will not change that agenda. It's happening, whether you like it or not. Thank God we front-loaded in the Working Families Tax Cut money for deportations, tens of billions for detention centers. 200,000 Americans have applied to be ICE agents because they love this great country and they don't want it destroyed. This is another hissy fit along the way by the Democrats who refuse to accept the political reality that they lost on this issue. So as far as I'm concerned, we could spend the next year debating this on this floor. This is a home game for Republicans. But what you're doing to the American people, what you're doing to FEMA, what you're doing to the people who rely on their communities to be rebuilt, the TSA agents that go to work every day, the Coast Guard, is shameful. Joe Biden opened up our border. It is literally unprecedented in American history that a president would say, we're not going to enforce our immigration laws. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama deported millions of people. This is an effort by the Democrats, this debate, to kneecap immigration enforcement, to kneecap ICE. They lost the issue on the front end of the election. Now they want to make it so hard for ICE to do their jobs that deportations come to a halt. That's the truth. And anybody in this town who tells you otherwise is just spinning. They don't want people deported because they're importing a voter base that they think will give them power. They're not even hiding behind this anymore. They've lost the argument with American citizens. And they think if they flood this country with illegal immigrants, and by the way, you shouldn't have to prove you're an American citizen to vote. That's their position. You shouldn't have to show photo ID, which is broadly supported, even among Democrat voters. Why would they do that? Why would they, even though their voters don't want that, even though their voters want photo ID to be established when you vote, why would they be opposed to that? Because they want people who shouldn't be able to vote, illegal immigrants or fraudsters, to vote for them. That's the truth. And so we have now the most secure border in the history of our country. and we're trying to execute on the immigration laws that we have on the books that have been voted for by Republicans and Democrats alike, and presidents of both parties have enforced those laws. This is about all the 21-point plan. If you think it's such a good idea, put that 21-point plan on the floor and let's vote on it. They won't do it because they'll lose. They know what it does. It ties up ICE's ability, which, by the way, they already have to abide by due process. There are already warrants. They know all this. They want to confuse the issue. Mostly because they believe in open borders, but also because this Trump derangement syndrome is it's a hard thing to kick. A really difficult thing for them to kick. We heard people being made, talked about here on the Senate floor. I want to mention a few names that no Democrat will ever utter. Laken Riley, Rachel Morin, Jocelyn Nungary, or Kayla Hamilton. These are American daughters, American sisters, who were murdered by illegal aliens. And by the way, Laken Riley's murderer wasn't a previously convicted violent criminal. So if that's your test of who should be deported, it didn't help Laken Riley's family. My priority, and the reason why I've been on this floor so many times about this issue, my priority is for Americans. Our immigration laws are put in place for one reason, to benefit America and Americans. The rhetoric that has come from the left on this and my Democrat colleagues, we talk about why was Minnesota a flashpoint? It's the sanctuary city status. The 9 sanctuary jurisdictions in this country, in them, ICE agents are 590 times more likely to be assaulted. Since January of last year, there's been a 1,347% increase in assaults against ICE officers, a 3,200% increase in vehicular attacks. And don't tell me Tim Walz doesn't have something to do with that. And don't tell me the Mayor Fry doesn't have something to do with that, with the rhetoric. Even senators on this floor have, called it Trump's secret police and the Gestapo and Nazis. Knock it off. I hope you know better, but some people are actually listening to you. You've created conditions where confrontations are more likely. There are deportations happening all over this country, in red states and blue states alike. You don't see what you see in sanctuary jurisdictions because they're cooperating. And let's be clear what sanctuary status really means to the American people, okay? Local authorities will not tell ICE agents when illegal alien rapists are being let out of prison. That's what it means, practically. They hate Donald Trump so much, and they believe in open borders so much, or they want new voters in this country for them so much, the crave for power so much, that they are willing to let an illegal immigrant rapist back out on the streets. A murderer. A burglar. Nope, we're not telling you. And oh, by the way, we're not going to send 911 to help you if you've got a problem. This is insane. So to my Republican colleagues, let's put all of those issues in front of the American people. I am not afraid of this debate at all. Bring it on. What's sad is that the Democrats continue to play the Olay game here. They negotiate a deal and then they hold it up. We saw this with the longest government shutdown in American history just a couple months ago, and now here we are again with DHS funding. Meanwhile, they're sipping wine and eating caviar in Europe. I went to Munich last year. It's also worth pointing out, by the way, that 2 years ago, almost to the date, we were here. And those of us who thought that quote-unquote bipartisan immigration plan was terrible, and it was, which is why it fell apart. It made illegal immigration easier. We had to hold the floor all weekend long in a bipartisan affair, by the way, to get the Ukraine funding done in time for Chuck Schumer to deliver $60 billion to Ukraine at the Munich Security Conference. What I have learned in 3 years here is the Munich Security Conference for Democrats is like the Super Bowl. This draw to commiserate with fellow Wilsonians is a powerful drug. I don't know why in the world Democrats get to vote no on this and fly to Munich. If the American people had any idea what went on in this town, they'd be way more upset than they are right now. They expect us to come up here and to work on their behalf. For Americans. For the American people. For Laken Riley's family. For Kayla Hamilton, who was autistic, who was raped and murdered in her apartment for the $3 that she had on her, so an illegal immigrant could go to Target with his buddy and spend the $3. Why don't we hear about those stories? Because it's not convenient to the narrative. That's what we're fighting against and who we're fighting for. That's who I'm fighting for. And if it was up to me, a lot of talk about it, we would be on this floor every single day fighting for Kayla Hamilton, fighting for Laken Riley, and the countless other daughters of this country who've been raped and murdered by illegal immigrants. Todd Lyons earlier today testified, okay, just to tell you how sick this is, that in Colorado, the ICE wanted to perform an operation in Colorado to deport illegal alien Tren de Agua gang members from an apartment complex. So they tried to work with the local authorities in that sanctuary state. Guess what happened? Protesters were there, but the illegal immigrant gang members were all gone. They had been tipped off. I actually can't believe this is happening in my country. I can't believe somebody's instinct in this crazy suicidal empathy. Their instinct would be to protect an illegal immigrant gang member who could very easily, and has, as some dangerous people, murder a family member, terrorize a community. They would rather tip them off than have them deported. These are the facts. So, what should we do? You know, here's what I think. I think it's actually an opportunity for us to strengthen our immigration laws. The Democrats want to kneecap ICE. I've submitted the Protect America Act for debate. It would do 4 things. 1, it would end sanctuary city status for good. 2, it would increase penalties for illegal entry and illegal reentry. A lot of these crimes are being committed by people who've been deported, they come back. That has happened. And by the way, if you come here illegally, I think you ought to have jail time. As a former federal prosecutor, as a former prosecutor, as Attorney General in Missouri, I can tell you, people respond to incentives. They knew, when we had a partnership with federal prosecutors in St. Louis, that if they were being busted for a federal crime, they were going to jail. If it was a state crime, and Kim Gardner, the Soros-funded prosecutor in St. Louis at the time, was handling the case, they literally would laugh in the back seat of the cop car because they knew they'd be out later that day. No more catch and release. If we're serious about it, no more catch and release. It's over. 3, if you assault an ICE officer, we're increasing those penalties too. Protest all you want. For God's sake, this is America. We have different points of view, but you don't get to interfere in the operations of federal law enforcement. Even if you really believe you're wearing the white hat, you don't get to do that. And 4th, this NGO network that's been created that is fomenting this vitriol and the operations that are putting ICE officers and citizens at risk, they need to lose their nonprofit status. So if we're serious about the problem, that's what we'll do. But I tell you what we're not going to do. We're not succumbing no matter how long it takes. If it's one day, and let's just say my Democrat friends come back from Munich and they feel really good about themselves because a bunch of European elites have told them all the things that they want to hear and vice versa. We're not coming back here, and we're not going to make it harder for ICE to do their jobs. We're not doing it. And I will do everything in my power, and I know a lot of other folks on my side of the aisle will do it too, to prevent that from ever happening. Because the American people saw what a disaster it was to have Democrats in charge of this country. We had a secure border. Joe Biden literally unsecured that border on day one. And we had 15 million people come here illegally. We're not going back. The American people saw that. They voted for President Trump. He was very clear about it. This wasn't a footnote in his campaign. This was a central theme. And you may not like it, but that's what our republic is about. For all the talk of saving democracy and sticking up for democracy I hear from the other side, it's all nonsense. If they actually believed that, they would respect the fact that the American people voted for this. They voted for deportations. And I know that, like, in the woke left world, it's a dirty word. It's not where I come from, not in Missouri. People believe in common sense. They don't think you should get to break the law like that and get away with it. So, I don't know when, I guess we'll be back here in a week or something, but the reality is not going to change. No matter how much Chuck Schumer tries to villainize ICE agents, no matter how many times I hear my colleagues from the other side try to stir up people, it will not change this very basic reality. We have front-loaded money for deportations, and those deportations will continue, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, if you want to make a proposal to stop that, put it on the floor. You'll lose. But I want them to know, and also my colleagues, I am 100% committed to this. It is central to the idea of being a sovereign country. No sane country in the history of the world would do this. By the way, speaking of heading over to Europe, ask them how mass migration is working out for them. They've done it, and it isn't working. So if you got any advice coming back from that side of the Atlantic, I'm not really interested on this topic or on censorship. Maybe you can deliver the message that they ought to step up for their own defense of their own continent in a more meaningful way. Now, that might not make you popular over there. That's the message that I delivered when over last year. But as it relates to illegal immigration, the deportations will continue. And I hope the American people understand that the people that just voted to defund ICE are sipping champagne in Europe, bad-mouthing the United States of America's foreign policy. That's who they are. That's the reality. And this debate will continue, Mr. President, But as far as I'm concerned, Republicans, we should be playing offense here. Let's strengthen our immigration laws. Let's treat this as seriously of a problem as it is for our country, as it really is. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Chair recognizes the senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations. Calendar 656, that the nominations be confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order to any of the nominations, and that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action at the Senate then resume legislative session.
Without objection.
Okay. As executive session, I ask consent that notwithstanding the referral of the nomination of Kevin Lilly of Texas to be Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife received in the Senate on February 11, 2026, to the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources Committee, the nomination be considered jointly referred to that committee, and that the Environmental and Public Works Committee.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that all members of the Republican Conference be authorized to sign duly enrolled bills or joint resolutions from February 12th through February 23rd.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate now proceed to the en-bloc consideration of the following resolutions, which are at the desk. Senate Resolution 609, Senate Resolution 610, Senate Resolution 611.
Is there an objection to proceeding on block? Without objection, the Senate will proceed on block.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolutions be agreed to, the preambles be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, all in block.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed the immediate consideration of H-Con Res 74, which was received from the House.
The clerk will report.
House Concurrent Resolution 74, providing for a joint session of Congress to receive a message from the President.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that with respect to House Joint Resolution 142, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding the upcoming adjournment of the Senate, the President of the Senate, the President pro tem and the majority and minority leaders be authorized to make appointments to commissions, committees, boards, conferences, or interparliamentary conferences authorized by law, by concurrent action of the two houses, or by order of the Senate.
Without objection.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn to then convene for pro forma session only, with no business being conducted on the following dates and times: Friday, February 13th at 9 a.m., Tuesday, February 17th at 6:30 p.m., Thursday, February 19th at 2 p.m. Further, that when the Senate adjourns on Thursday, February 19th, it stand adjourned until 3 p.m. on Monday, February 23rd, that following the prayer and pledge, Senator Kaine be recognized to deliver Washington's farewell address as provided under the previous order, and following his remarks, the Journal of Proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour to be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and Senate be in period of morning business with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. Further, notwithstanding Rule 22, that the cloture motion filed during today's session of the Senate ripen at 5:30 p.m.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m.